There are stories in life that only reveal their true meaning when we've faced enough challenges and pain. It's through these struggles that we discover the real value of love, forgiveness, and change. Today, you'll follow the journey of Nathan, a man who once stood on the edge of betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. But instead of letting these things defeat him, Nathan found a way to heal, to love again, and to live a new life, even when everything around him had changed. Nathan's story is not just the story of a father or a husband, it's the story of resilience, growth, and those moments we all seek: peace, reconciliation, and love. If you're looking for inspiration, if you believe that every challenge can be overcome, then join me as we witness this powerful journey. Because sometimes, healing begins in the most unexpected ways. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story. Let's dive in. Nathan Miller, a successful architect in his early 40s, had always prided himself on his perfect family. His wife, Emily, a former teacher turned stay-at-home mom, was everything he could have hoped for: kind, supportive, and always smiling. Their 2 children, Chloe, 14, and Liam, 10, were the center of his universe. They lived in a quiet suburban town, where everything seemed idyllic from the outside. But everything would change in a single moment, one evening, after a week-long business trip to New York. Nathan had arrived back early, feeling a bit tired from the hectic meetings and the long flight. As he entered the house, he noticed something odd: the lights were dim, and he could hear voices coming from the living room. It was supposed to be just Emily and the kids tonight. But when he entered, what he overheard shook him to his core. Emily and Chloe were sitting on the couch, speaking in low tones, clearly unaware of Nathan's presence. "I don't know how to tell him, Mom. What if he never forgives you? Or me?" Chloe's voice quivered. "I'll explain everything to him when the time is right," Emily replied softly. "But the truth is, Nathan isn't their real father, Chloe. It's Mark. You know, it's been him all along." Nathan froze. His legs went weak as his heart hammered in his chest. He had heard enough. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just overheard. Mark? His best friend, Mark? A knot twisted in his stomach, and his mind raced back to all the years he had spent with Emily, all the moments he thought were shared in truth. His head spun as he stepped back, unsure whether to confront them immediately or leave the house in silence. The following days were nothing short of a nightmare for Nathan. He didn't know how to act, what to say, or who to trust. Emily had been distant, avoiding him whenever they were alone. Her eyes no longer held the warmth they once did. When they spoke, their words were short and strained, and there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Nathan's emotions were all over the place. Anger, confusion, sadness, he couldn't make sense of any of it. Every night, he would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in his head. After hours of silent reflection, he decided to confront Emily. He knew he couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. One evening, when their children were asleep, Nathan gathered his courage. "Emily, we need to talk," Nathan said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. She didn't look up from her book, but she knew it was coming. Slowly, she set the book down and met his gaze. "Nathan, I know you overheard Chloe and me," Emily said softly, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "I didn't want you to find out this way." Nathan's face turned pale, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. "Why? Why didn't you tell me, Emily?" She sighed deeply, her eyes filled with regret. "It was complicated, Nathan. Mark and it started before we met you. And then we were separated for years, and I thought you could be their father. But when we reconnected, things got messy. I didn't want to hurt you, but I didn't want to lose my family either." Nathan's mind reeled. His best friend, Mark, the one he'd known for decades. The man he had trusted above all others. It was all too much. His voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke again. "How long has this been going on, Emily?" Emily hesitated before answering. "Since before Liam was born. I didn't want to break up our family. I thought it was the right thing to do." Nathan felt his world collapse around him. He didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal of his wife or the fact that his children were not truly his. They had never been his. The days that followed were filled with awkward silences and hurtful words. Nathan couldn't understand how Emily could have kept such a secret for so long. The trust that had once been the foundation of their marriage was now shattered, and the pieces were too broken to repair. Nathan's mind kept returning to one thought: what does this mean for the kids? They had both Chloe and Liam in their lives for so long. He had raised them, cared for them, loved them unconditionally. Would they still see him as their father? Or would they resent him for not being their biological parent? Nathan spent sleepless nights questioning his own identity. Was he a father without biology? In an attempt to find answers, Nathan reached out to his old friend Mark. They hadn't spoken much in the past few years, but he knew he had to face him. If nothing else, for the sake of the truth. When they met, Nathan was shocked by the calmness in Mark's eyes. There was no guilt, no regret. Mark seemed as though nothing had changed. He seemed to have moved on, living his life while Nathan was stuck in turmoil. "Nathan, I didn't want to hurt you," Mark said, his tone almost nonchalant. "But when Emily and I reconnected, it just happened. It wasn't planned." Nathan's fists clenched at his sides. "You didn't plan it? You've been sleeping with my wife, Mark. And you had no intention of telling me? Do you think this is just some game to you?" Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly not affected by Nathan's anger. "It's complicated, man. I know it wasn't right, but Emily and I were always connected. You weren't around as much, and things changed." Nathan's chest tightened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Mark's casualness only made the situation worse. As the weeks went by, Nathan's internal struggle intensified. He was constantly torn between his duties as a father to Chloe and Liam, and his need for justice for the wrongs done to him. He couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay when it wasn't. He found himself growing distant from Emily, though part of him still held on to the hope of reconciliation. But another part of him was angry, furious with the deceit, the lies, and the entire situation. It was becoming clear that the family Nathan thought he had was not the family he actually had. One day, while sitting in the park with Chloe and Liam, Nathan had a conversation that would change the course of his life. Chloe, with tears in her eyes, finally spoke the words he needed to hear. "Dad, I don't care about biology. You've been there for me all my life. That's what matters." Liam nodded, his innocent eyes full of sincerity. "You're our dad, no matter what." Nathan's heart swelled with emotion. He had been given a glimpse of hope, of something greater than blood, love. But could he live with the truth? Would it be enough to rebuild the pieces of his broken family? Nathan knew there was no easy way out of this. There were no simple answers. He had to come to terms with the fact that his life would never be the same, and that he would have to find a new way forward, not just for him, but for his children. Emily still hoped they could fix things, but Nathan wasn't so sure anymore. He had changed. The pain of betrayal was too deep to ignore, and the path to healing was far from clear. What would the future hold for them as a family? And could Nathan ever truly forgive? As the days turned into weeks, Nathan focused on rebuilding himself, trying to find a sense of peace in the chaos. He spent more time with Chloe and Liam, working through their pain together. They had been through so much already. But the journey was just beginning. As the weeks dragged on, Nathan found himself waking up each morning with a sense of unease. The weight of his newfound reality pressed on him, from the lingering resentment he felt towards Emily to the ongoing uncertainty about his role in the children's lives. One evening, after an uncomfortable dinner with Emily, where every word seemed to be wrapped in tension, Nathan decided to take a step back and reevaluate. It wasn't just the betrayal that gnawed at him. It was the realization that he didn't know who he was anymore. Was he still the man he had been before, the loving husband and father? Or was he now someone entirely different, a man who had been deceived and, in some ways, replaced? The following day, Nathan made a decision. He would take some time away from the house, away from the emotional strain of constant confrontation. It wasn't a break from his children, they were his heart, and he would never walk away from them. But he needed to find a sense of clarity. Nathan rented a small cabin by the lake, a place he had visited once during a brief break years ago. The isolation and stillness of nature, with only the sound of the water lapping against the shore, felt like a balm for his restless soul. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to just breathe, without the weight of expectations or unanswered questions. But even in solitude, Nathan couldn't escape the inner turmoil that haunted him. Thoughts of Emily, of Mark, of the life they had built, all of it continued to swirl in his mind. The questions didn't stop. Was this betrayal something he could ever forgive? Was his bond with Chloe and Liam strong enough to withstand the cracks in their family foundation? One morning, as Nathan walked along the lake's edge, a familiar face appeared in the distance. It was Sarah, a woman he had known from a few years ago. Sarah had been a colleague at a previous job, and though they had lost touch, they shared a mutual respect and friendship. "Hey, Nathan," Sarah called, waving as she approached. "I didn't expect to see you here." Nathan offered a half-smile. "Yeah, just needed a little time to clear my head." Sarah studied him for a moment, sensing the weight of his words. "Is everything okay?" Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Family stuff. I'm just trying to figure things out." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I get it. Life can get overwhelming sometimes. But you don't have to carry it all on your own. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." The simplicity of her words resonated with Nathan. In his current state, he didn't want to burden his friends back home or make his family's situation even more complicated. Yet, somehow, Sarah's presence here felt like an unexpected lifeline. It had been months since he had allowed himself to connect with anyone outside his immediate circle, and here she was, offering a listening ear with no judgment. Over the next few days, Sarah and Nathan spent time together, walking by the lake, sharing stories about their past, and slowly revealing pieces of their lives. For the first time in a long while, Nathan felt seen, not as a husband or father, but as just Nathan, the person beneath all the titles and responsibilities. Sarah, too, shared her struggles with Nathan. Her marriage had been on the rocks, and she had recently separated from her husband. The pain she carried mirrored his own, though her experience was rooted in different circumstances. They both understood the weight of broken relationships, of lost trust, and of the journey toward healing. One evening, as they sat around a small fire by the lake, Sarah turned to him with a thoughtful look in her eyes. "You know," she said softly, "I think sometimes we have to lose ourselves before we can find out who we truly are. Maybe what you're going through isn't just about what happened with Emily. Maybe it's about rediscovering yourself." Nathan stared at the flames, letting her words sink in. For months, he had been trapped in a cycle of anger and confusion, consumed by the lies, the betrayal, and the questions. But Sarah was right, maybe this wasn't just about rebuilding his family. Maybe it was about reclaiming his identity, about rediscovering the man he had once been before everything changed. Back in the city, Nathan returned to his daily routine, but things were different now. He had taken that step back, allowing himself to reflect and process everything he had been through. The clarity he had sought didn't come overnight, but it began to form in small moments. His relationship with Emily remained tense, but they began to have conversations that weren't just filled with blame and resentment. They talked about their past, their mistakes, and their hopes for the future, whether or not they could still have a future together. Emily, too, was on her own journey of self-reflection, understanding the damage her actions had caused. But she was also trying to make amends, one step at a time. Chloe and Liam, though still struggling with the changes in their family, began to show Nathan more affection. They missed the connection they had once shared, and though the truth about their biological father had shaken them, they still saw Nathan as their dad. The unconditional love they had for him helped heal some of the wounds, even as the family adjusted to the new dynamics. As the months passed, Nathan's perspective on life began to shift. His time alone had helped him discover that healing didn't mean forgetting the past, it meant accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward. It wasn't about holding on to the pain or trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. It was about creating something new, something stronger. As Nathan continued to grow, so did his relationship with his children. He no longer viewed his role as a father through the lens of biological ties. He realized that being a father was about presence, love, and sacrifice. It was about showing up for the people who mattered most, even when life got complicated. One evening, as he sat with Chloe and Liam in the backyard, watching the sunset, Chloe leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder. Dad, she said quietly, I don't care who my real dad is. You've always been the one who took care of me. That's what matters. Liam nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, you're the best, Dad. Nathan's heart swelled with emotion, his eyes stinging with tears. In that moment, he knew he had done the right thing. Despite the turmoil, despite the heartbreak, he had chosen to be there for them. And that was enough. But as he sat there, surrounded by his children, Nathan also realized that his journey was far from over. The road to healing, forgiveness, and self-discovery was long, and there would be moments when the weight of the past would still feel heavy. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. He felt like he could face whatever came next, not because the pain had gone away, but because he had learned to live with it, to move forward despite it. As time went on, Nathan's life slowly began to fall into a new rhythm. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. He had built a new relationship with his children, one founded on trust, understanding, and unconditional love. He had learned to forgive Emily, though their relationship would never be the same. And he had discovered a new strength within himself, one that didn't come from external validation or societal expectations, but from his own resilience and capacity to love. The pain of the past would never fully fade, but Nathan had learned how to live with it. And in doing so, he had created a new chapter in his life, a chapter where, despite everything that had happened, he had found peace, redemption, and the strength to build something better, for himself and for the family that truly mattered. As the days blended into weeks, Nathan found himself standing at the edge of a new chapter in his life, yet the past still cast a shadow over his every step. The emotional burden of betrayal hadn't evaporated completely, no matter how much he wanted it to. While his relationship with Chloe and Liam had become stronger and more grounded in love, there were still moments when doubt crept in. One afternoon, Emily approached Nathan, her face filled with a mix of hesitance and hope. Nathan, I've been thinking, she began, her voice faltering slightly. I know it hasn't been easy for you to forgive me, but I need to ask you something. I need you to truly consider it. Nathan, his guard up as always, glanced at her cautiously. What is it? Emily took a deep breath, her eyes searching his face, as though looking for some sign that he was open to hearing her out. I don't know where this road is going, Nathan. I don't even know if there's a way back for us. But, can we start over? Not as a family the way we were, but, as individuals. Can we begin to rebuild trust from the ground up? Nathan's heart twinged with a complicated mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to scream at her for what she had done, for the secret that had torn their lives apart. But another part, small but persistent, wanted to believe in the possibility of healing. He wasn't sure he could ever trust her the way he once had. But the question hung in the air, unanswered. Was it worth trying to repair something that had been broken so completely? Could he forgive her for the sake of his children, for the sake of their future? Nathan took a deep breath and responded slowly, I don't know. It's not just about you and me anymore, Emily. It's about what we've done to our family, and whether or not we can fix it. Weeks passed, and though Nathan had committed himself to finding peace with his situation, life had a way of throwing curveballs. One Thursday evening, as Nathan was at his office finishing up some work, he received a phone call that would alter his course once again. Mr. Miller. This is Detective Adams. We need to discuss something regarding your family. The tone of the officer's voice immediately set Nathan on edge. The detective continued, there's been an incident with Mark. He's missing. Nathan's mind reeled. Missing? What do you mean missing? Mark was not just an old friend, he had been an integral part of Nathan's life. To hear those words, especially in the wake of everything that had happened, was a blow that Nathan hadn't been prepared for. He listened in disbelief as the detective explained that Mark had left behind strange circumstances at his home, and no one had been able to get in touch with him for over 48 hours. Nathan, I know you've been through a lot lately, but, is there any chance you might know where he could be? Any chance he would have contacted you? Detective Adams asked. Nathan's stomach tightened as he thought about the long, complicated history with Mark. He had been angry with him, yes, but this? The thought of something happening to him made Nathan uneasy, despite everything. I don't know. We've barely spoken in the past few months, Nathan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I'll keep an eye out, though. If I hear anything, I'll let you know. But as he hung up the phone, a feeling of unease settled over him. Where had Mark gone? What had happened to him? The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Nathan couldn't shake the thought of his old friend. The way Mark had distanced himself over the past year, the strange, quiet manner in which he had carried on after everything had come to light, it all seemed so odd. Nathan began to wonder if Mark had been running from something, or if there was something deeper at play that neither he nor Emily had seen coming. As Nathan processed the news about Mark, he found himself reflecting on everything that had led up to this point. His relationship with Emily had come to a standstill. They still shared the same house, but the weight of their fractured past loomed large between them. Emily was trying her best to be patient, but Nathan could see the exhaustion in her eyes, perhaps the guilt, too, that never seemed to leave her. And then there was Chloe and Liam, who, despite their growing attachment to Nathan, seemed to be navigating their own set of questions. Chloe, in particular, was struggling. One night, after dinner, she pulled Nathan aside, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and vulnerability. "Dad," she said softly, her voice shaking, "I don't know how to feel anymore. Sometimes it's like everything's been turned upside down. I just want it to go back to the way it was. I know it can't, but I don't know how to handle it." Nathan reached out, pulling Chloe into a hug. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain: he loved her. And he would keep fighting for their bond, no matter how hard things got. "I know, sweetheart," Nathan whispered, his heart aching with the weight of her words. "I know it's hard. But we'll get through this. Together." Liam, ever the quiet observer, had been unusually distant lately. Nathan noticed the small, almost imperceptible shift in his behavior. He wasn't the same carefree child Nathan had once known, and it saddened him. As a father, Nathan wanted to fix everything for his kids, to shield them from the pain of their broken family. But it wasn't that simple. Nathan knew that rebuilding his family would take time. It wasn't a matter of fixing things overnight, or even in the months to come. It would be a long road, one that required patience, understanding, and a lot of forgiveness. But even as he looked at the faces of his children, he realized that no matter what happened with Emily, he had one thing that mattered above all else: his family's love. One afternoon, as Nathan sat in his office reviewing blueprints for a new project, his phone rang again. This time, it was the call he had feared, but knew was inevitable. "Mr. Miller, we've found Mark," Detective Adams said gravely. Nathan's stomach twisted. He braced himself for what was to come. He's been found dead, sir. We believe it was an accident, but we're still investigating." Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Mark? Gone. Just like that. There was a long pause before Nathan spoke, his voice barely audible. How did it happen?" The detective went on to explain that Mark had been found in a car wreck on a remote road, his car having crashed into a tree. It seemed like a tragic accident, but there were still questions left unanswered, questions that would take time to uncover. Nathan felt a profound sadness wash over him. Mark had been a part of his life for so long, and now, just when Nathan thought he could begin to understand the truth about their friendship, it was too late. There was nothing left to say to him, no more opportunities for closure. But perhaps there was something more important now. Nathan needed to focus on the family he still had, the children who depended on him, and the future that lay ahead, uncertain and unclear though it might be. In the weeks that followed Mark's tragic death, Nathan found himself wrapped in an overwhelming sense of both grief and disbelief. It felt surreal, as if the universe had taken yet another person from him, someone who had been a part of his life for years, only to leave him with more questions than answers. But as the sorrow settled, Nathan realized that life had to move on. He had children to care for, a life to rebuild, and though it felt like a hollow shell sometimes, there was still hope. There was always hope, just as Sarah had reminded him when they first met again by the lake. He'd started spending more time with Chloe and Liam, doing small things that helped them reconnect as a family. They had started a new tradition, Sunday morning walks in the park. It wasn't much, but it was something, an opportunity to bond without the weight of the past looming over them. Chloe, more so than Liam, seemed to have an unspoken understanding with him now. Her maturity had blossomed in the wake of everything that had happened, and Nathan saw glimpses of the woman she was becoming, strong, resilient, and compassionate. She asked fewer questions about her biological father, and when she did, Nathan answered with the truth, always keeping her well-being at the forefront. One Sunday afternoon, while sitting on the park bench after their walk, Chloe leaned her head on Nathan's shoulder, a quiet comfort between them. "Dad," she said softly, almost as if to herself, "I know we've gone through a lot, but I just want you to know I'm glad you're still here. For us." Nathan's heart tightened with a mixture of pride and sadness. He had wondered, during the darkest times, if he could ever provide the emotional stability they both needed. But moments like this, quiet and unassuming, were all the proof he needed. His children were healing, and in turn, he was healing too. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I'm always going to be here for you. Both of you," he replied, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. The grief from Mark's passing was still fresh, but Nathan was beginning to see a shift within himself. He had spent so many months locked in the pain of betrayal, and now, as he looked at his children, he realized that the past, though important, didn't define him. It was his present actions that mattered. One evening, as Nathan was sitting with his laptop in the living room, a call came through from Emily. "Can we talk?" Emily's voice, though hesitant, carried an undeniable note of urgency. Nathan hadn't been expecting this. He had assumed that their strained attempts at communication had reached an impasse. But the tone in her voice made him pause. "Of course. What's on your mind?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot," she began. "About what you said before, about rebuilding. I know it's not easy for you, and I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. But I wanted you to know that I'm committed to making things right. Not just for the kids, but for you too, Nathan." Her words hung in the air, a mix of vulnerability and sincerity that Nathan hadn't heard from her in months. For a long time, he had carried the weight of resentment. Forgiving Emily, rebuilding the broken trust, felt like an insurmountable mountain. But the words she spoke gave him pause. Could they, in fact, find a way forward? "I've been thinking, too," Nathan said slowly. Maybe we can start with small steps. For the kids, for us. We don't need to fix everything right away, but we have to try. They need us, Emily. They need both of us." Emily's breath on the other end was shaky, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I can do that. I just want to be a better person for them. For you." Nathan could feel her sincerity in every word, and despite the emotional scars left by her betrayal, a part of him wanted to believe that healing was possible, not just for their family, but for them as individuals. The path forward would be long, but it was worth considering. The following days were filled with tentative steps forward. Emily began to show up more often to spend time with the kids. Nathan wasn't sure what to expect at first, but he kept his boundaries firm, keeping their interactions civil and focused on the children's well-being. He knew the importance of moving at a pace that felt right for him, not rushing the process. One evening, after a family dinner, Emily asked if they could have a conversation, just the two of them. Nathan hesitated but agreed, knowing that open dialogue was the first step to healing. They sat on the back porch, the evening breeze gently rustling the leaves. The air between them was still thick with unspoken emotions, but there was an underlying understanding that had grown between them over the past few weeks. "I'm sorry, Nathan," Emily said, her voice steady but emotional. "I know I've hurt you more than anyone could understand, and I'm ashamed of it. I wish I could change things, but I can't. All I can do now is show you that I'm trying. I want to rebuild our lives, even if it means taking small steps." Nathan nodded, looking out into the yard. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same, Emily. But we can try. For the kids, for ourselves. And for the life we've always wanted, even if it's not the one we thought we'd have." Emily was quiet for a moment, then softly reached out and took Nathan's hand. "I'll do whatever it takes." For the first time in a long while, Nathan didn't pull away. There was no immediate rush to fix everything, no illusion that they could return to how things were before. But in that moment, there was hope. Hope that forgiveness, though difficult, could still find a way into their hearts. Over the following months, Nathan continued to grow stronger. His relationship with Emily had transformed into something tentative but real. They focused on their children, their primary concern, and allowed themselves to slowly rebuild communication with one another. There were days of doubt, of uncertainty, but there were also moments of genuine connection, small conversations, shared memories, and the growing understanding that they both wanted the best for their family, even if that looked different than they had originally envisioned. As spring turned to summer, Nathan and Emily sat down one evening to discuss their future as co-parents, their shared hopes for the children, and their roles in each other's lives. "Do you think we could ever find a way to be friends again?" Emily asked softly, her eyes searching Nathan's face. Nathan paused, his mind racing. He wasn't sure yet. He wasn't sure if they could ever return to what they once had, but he was willing to explore the possibility, at least for the sake of their children. "I don't know," Nathan said honestly. "But maybe we don't need to go back to what was. Maybe we just need to figure out what this new dynamic is. And take it one day at a time." They both nodded, understanding the weight of the decision they were making. The road ahead was unclear, and there were no guarantees. But one thing was certain, Nathan had learned that healing, in any form, was a long journey, filled with small steps, patience, and above all, the willingness to move forward despite the obstacles. As Nathan sat there, looking out at the night sky with Emily by his side, he realized that hope, though fragile, was still alive. And that was enough, for now. Life moved forward. The slow, steady work of healing continued, both individually and as a family. Chloe and Liam thrived in the stability Nathan and Emily were slowly learning to build. They found comfort in their new normal, and though it wasn't perfect, it was theirs. Nathan's career also flourished. He had become more focused, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. The success he found in his professional life was the result of not just hard work, but of understanding the balance between his personal and professional worlds. And in his heart, Nathan knew that while the past would always be a part of him, the future held infinite possibilities. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was a road he would walk with his children, with Emily, and with the strength he had found within himself. By the fall, the remnants of the past had started to blend into something new, a mixture of old memories and new beginnings. Nathan had begun to realize that life wasn't about forgetting the past but learning to live with it, accepting it, and moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. The healing had started, slowly but surely. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table with Chloe and Liam, the kids began discussing their school projects. Liam had recently gotten involved in a community volunteer program, and Chloe had been thriving in her high school debate team. Nathan smiled, watching them interact, feeling an immense sense of pride and relief. They were growing into young adults with strength, compassion, and determination, everything he hoped they would be. But something was missing. As they talked about their day, Nathan felt a sharp pang in his chest. It wasn't a regret or sadness, it was more like an echo of something that used to be. He hadn't felt truly alive in a long time. His days had become a rhythm of work, home, family time, and the occasional check-in with Emily, but he felt like he was living in a space that wasn't entirely his own. It was a strange feeling, and he wasn't sure how to place it. He had everything he had once dreamed of, a family, stability, love, but it felt like a piece of himself was still missing. The next day, he took a walk to clear his head, the early autumn air cool against his face. As he wandered, he found himself reflecting on everything he had gone through, the betrayal, the struggle, the healing. He had done so much for his family, but what about himself? He passed a cafe he used to frequent back when life was simpler, before everything fell apart. It was a place where he would go to work, have a coffee, and dream about the future. On a whim, he stepped inside, ordered his usual drink, and found a quiet spot by the window. For the first time in months, he felt a wave of nostalgia, but also a sense of clarity. This was the moment he realized, he had been so focused on fixing things for everyone else that he had forgotten to nurture himself. He had neglected his own passions, his own sense of purpose beyond being a father and a provider. It was time to rediscover what made him feel alive again. Nathan's first step toward finding himself again was subtle. He began with small changes, taking up activities he once enjoyed before life became a series of obligations. He reconnected with his old hobby of photography, an art form he had put aside years ago. He began taking weekend trips to the countryside, capturing the beauty of the world through his lens. Photography had always been a way for him to see the world with a fresh perspective, to slow down and appreciate the small details in life. It wasn't just about the pictures, it was about the process of seeing things differently, the act of capturing moments that often went unnoticed. It was therapeutic, and for the first time in a while, Nathan felt a spark of joy. He also began to take time for himself. Evening runs after dinner, long baths, reading books he hadn't touched in years, these moments allowed him to reclaim his sense of self. Slowly but surely, Nathan realized that he had to behold himself before he could continue being the best father, son, or even friend. One afternoon, Chloe sat down next to him after he had just returned from a photo walk. "Dad," she said thoughtfully, "I've noticed something. You seem different. Like, in a good way. You seem happier. Is everything okay?" Nathan paused, looking at his daughter with a smile. It had been a long time since he had truly felt happy, and it felt good to say it aloud. "I think I'm starting to figure it out, Chloe," he replied. "It's just. I've been so focused on everyone else that I forgot to take care of myself. But now, I'm starting to do things for me, too. I think it's helping." Chloe's face lit up, and she wrapped her arms around him for a hug. "I'm glad, Dad. You deserve to be happy." As Nathan's personal journey continued, his relationship with Emily also began to take on a new dynamic. The foundation of trust they were rebuilding was still fragile, but there was an understanding now that had been absent before. They were both working on their own healing, and in turn, their co-parenting relationship had become healthier. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table discussing the kids' schedules, Emily mentioned an old friend of theirs who had reached out. "Mark's sister called me today," Emily said quietly. "She's organizing a memorial for Mark in a few weeks. She wanted to know if you'd be willing to come. It's going to be a small gathering, just close friends and family." Nathan's heart twisted at the mention of Mark. He hadn't been able to attend the funeral, the weight of grief had been too much for him to bear at the time. Now, with some space between the shock and the sorrow, he felt like he might be ready to face it. "I don't know, Emily. It's still hard to think about him being gone," Nathan confessed. Emily nodded in understanding. "I get it. I wasn't sure how I felt about it either. But I think it might help bring some closure, for all of us." Nathan thought for a moment. He still carried the anger and hurt from Mark's betrayal, his affair with Emily, but at the same time, he remembered the friendship they had shared. The thought of saying goodbye to someone who had been part of his life for so long stirred up complex emotions, but he knew he couldn't run from them forever. "I'll go," Nathan said with a sigh. "I think it's time." The upcoming memorial marked another pivotal moment in Nathan's journey, a chance for closure, forgiveness, and a final reckoning with his past. The memorial was held on a quiet Saturday afternoon, in a small chapel surrounded by nature. It was intimate, with only a handful of people attending. Nathan arrived early, standing alone for a moment, staring at the flowers that marked the spot where Mark's life had been memorialized. When Emily arrived, they exchanged a silent glance. The years of hurt and betrayal hung in the air, but there was a mutual understanding between them that neither could ignore. As the ceremony began, Nathan found himself facing not just the loss of Mark but the complexity of his own emotions. The pain of betrayal was still there, lingering, but so too was the appreciation for the friendship they had once shared. He could never forget what had happened, but he could begin to understand how to let go of the anger. Later, as the memorial drew to a close, Nathan stood by the grave, alone for a moment. He whispered a quiet goodbye to Mark, not just the man he had once called a friend, but the version of him that had carried so much pain. Turning back, Nathan found Emily standing nearby. She had a soft, apologetic look on her face, but Nathan didn't need to say anything. The moment of closure was enough for both of them. Life after the memorial took on a different rhythm. Nathan had made peace with the past, but he knew that moving forward didn't mean erasing what had happened, it meant accepting it, learning from it, and continuing to build something better. He had his photography, his children, his family. He had the space to heal and rediscover who he was outside of his roles as a father, a partner, and a provider. Nathan no longer felt like he was living in the shadow of his past. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next, knowing that no matter the obstacles, he had the strength to face them. His relationship with Emily remained steady, built on mutual respect and understanding. They were co-parents, not lovers, and that was enough for them to focus on what mattered most, their children. And as Nathan stood in the sunlight one quiet afternoon, camera in hand, he felt a quiet, satisfying peace. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to embrace it. It had been nearly a year since the memorial for Mark, and life had shifted in ways Nathan never thought possible. What had once seemed like an unending series of struggles had evolved into something more manageable, something filled with quieter moments of peace and joy. His life wasn't perfect, no life ever is, but there was balance now, and with it, a profound sense of gratitude. One morning, as Nathan walked into the kitchen, the sun shining brightly through the windows, he found Chloe and Liam sitting at the breakfast table, laughing about something trivial. The sound of their laughter brought a warmth to his heart that no amount of material success or professional achievement could ever compare to. This, right here, was everything. His children, his family, his future. "Good morning, Dad," Liam said, grinning as he looked up from his cereal. "Morning, buddy," Nathan replied, ruffling Liam's hair. "What's so funny?" "It's just a dumb joke I heard yesterday," Liam explained, still chuckling. "You wouldn't get it." Nathan smiled, feeling a pang of tenderness for his son. He had seen so many changes in Liam over the past year, more confidence, more maturity, but there was still that playful spark that made him laugh like a child. It reminded Nathan how much he had grown as a father too, watching his kids transform into their own people while still needing him, in their own way. Chloe looked up from her phone, a serious expression on her face. "Dad, I think it's time we talk about something important." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What's up, Chloe?" "Well," she began, setting her phone down, "I've been thinking a lot about college. I'm really considering applying to schools out of state. You know, to explore new places and grow as a person." The words hit Nathan like a wave. He had known this day would come, but the reality of it still struck him hard. Chloe was growing up. She was becoming independent, finding her own path. Out of state. "Wow, that's big," Nathan said, trying to hide the mixture of pride and sadness welling up inside him. "I know," Chloe replied, her voice soft but resolute. "It's just something I feel I need to do. You've always told me to chase what makes me happy, to take chances. I think it's time." Nathan nodded, swallowing his emotions. He had spent so many years focused on keeping his family together, on maintaining stability, that he hadn't fully realized how much his children had grown and how much they would eventually need to chart their own paths. He would never hold her back, though. If anything, he was proud of her. Proud that she was ready to take the next step. "You'll do great, Chloe," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "I've always known you were meant for big things. And no matter where you go, you'll always have a home with us." Tears filled Chloe's eyes as she moved toward him, hugging him tightly. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have made it this far without you." Nathan held her, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was part of the journey too, letting go. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For both of them. The following weeks were filled with preparations, college applications, emotional goodbyes, and new beginnings. For Nathan, one of the most important changes was the growing comfort and respect in his relationship with Emily. They had learned to coexist as co-parents, sharing responsibility for their children's futures without the weight of resentment and anger. They had come to understand that while they would never be able to return to what they once had, they had created something new, a partnership rooted in mutual care and shared goals for their kids. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, sorting through bills and schedules, Emily spoke up. "You know, Nathan," she said, looking up from the papers, "I never expected us to get here. After everything, I thought we'd never be able to look at each other the same way again. But I think we've come a long way." Nathan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I never thought I could forgive you for everything that happened. It took a long time. But I've learned that forgiveness is a process. It's not about forgetting, but about healing, together." Emily smiled softly, a look of gratitude in her eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Nathan. But I'm so thankful for it." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them absorbing the gravity of their conversation. They weren't in love anymore, and they had long since come to terms with that. But there was something beautiful in their shared understanding, something that had taken years to cultivate. A friendship, a bond forged through their shared history and the love they both had for their children. The day of Chloe's graduation arrived, and it felt like both an ending and a beginning. Chloe stood in her cap and gown, beaming with pride as she looked out at her family. Nathan couldn't help but feel a swell of emotion in his chest. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when his daughter took her first step into the world without him by her side every day. As Chloe walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Nathan felt a bittersweet pride. She had worked so hard, and now, she was ready to spread her wings. It was the end of one chapter, but also the beginning of her own journey. Later, as the family gathered for a small celebratory dinner, Chloe turned to Nathan. "Dad," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I just want to say, thank you. For everything. For being there. For supporting me. I know I'm not always easy to deal with, but you've always had my back." Nathan smiled, feeling the weight of the years settle into his bones. "You've made me proud, Chloe. Every step of the way. And I'm always going to be here for you, no matter where you go or what you do." As the months went by, Nathan continued to heal. He found peace in his work, his family, and his passions. The house, once filled with tension and uncertainty, had become a home again. Chloe settled into her new life at college, and Liam, though still young, was finding his own way as well. Nathan kept up his photography, traveling more, capturing the beauty of life and the world around him. He had learned to find joy in the simplest of things, the quiet mornings, the sound of his children's laughter, the moments of introspection that allowed him to breathe and move forward. Though the road had been long, Nathan had come out the other side a different person. Stronger, more resilient, and more aware of the preciousness of time. Life would continue to bring its challenges, but he was no longer afraid of them. He had learned that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And no matter what the future held, he knew he would face it with the strength of someone who had fought for his happiness, his family, and his peace. And as Nathan stood by the window, looking out at the sun setting over the horizon, he realized that this moment, was enough. It was a moment of completion, a moment of quiet fulfillment. A few years later, Nathan stood outside a new art gallery in the heart of the city. His photography was being showcased for the first time, a culmination of years of self-discovery, hard work, and healing. Chloe, now a young adult, was there beside him, her eyes bright with excitement and pride. Liam, too, had joined him, his once youthful energy replaced with a more grounded, mature outlook. Emily had attended the opening as well, a silent support in the background. It was a day of celebration, not just for Nathan's work, but for everything he had overcome. The gallery doors opened, and people began to flood in, admiring his photographs and the stories they told. Nathan stood quietly, observing it all, finally feeling at peace with his place in the world. This was the life he had fought for, the life that had seemed so far away when everything first fell apart. And now, as he looked at his family, his work, and the people around him, he knew he had created something beautiful from the ashes of his past. A new chapter, a new beginning, one that was filled with hope. And so, Nathan's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is always a way to heal, grow, and rebuild. No matter how hard the path may seem, there is always hope for a better tomorrow. What part of Nathan's story resonated with you the most? What challenges have you faced in your own life that taught you the power of resilience and forgiveness? I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss another inspiring story. Your support means the world, and I'm so grateful to have you here with us. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to sharing more powerful journeys with you. Until next time, take care and keep moving forward.